Hey guys, welcome back. So now going back to more talks about Infinity Warps, which is kind of like your inception of a story within a story within a story, with Infinity Warps taking place within Infinity Wars, which is also happening amidst the War of Realms, and even that on a larger scope is just a section or an era in time amongst countless eons. And so for that reason, I want to talk a bit about the origin of Ghost Panther, in addition to some of the things that Warp World may be showing us, and last but not least, the mindset of some of these characters. So now if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, with this war within a war within a war, we've come to find out recently where a lot of these different pieces sit. And recently on my War of Realms playlist, I've talked about not only how the War of Realms has been building up for the past few years, because man, it's pretty much 2019, time flies, but we're setting the stage of how the War of Realms has been building up and the results of that conflict from the War of Realms stretching throughout eons. We recently got a glimpse within Infinity Wars of how big that conflict is beyond Infinity Wars. And this is something that we talked about recently in the Phoenix Wolverine Saves Loki Twice video, when Loki travels beyond the Warped World universe and he sees Wolverine with the Phoenix Force, who even at this point has had it for centuries. But with Loki running into him here, just before Wolverine single-handedly takes on a swarm of Celestials, it just goes to show us that outside of space and time, there is a much bigger slew of events that is going on. But even keeping that in consideration, going back to Infinity Wars, when we step back and we revisit some of the things that took place there, when Requiem collected the stones, killed Thanos, and made an attempt to do things differently than Thanos would by folding the universe in half instead of just getting rid of half of the life in the universe, which is something that we also discovered also played into the fact of keeping Thanos alive through his children carrying out his legacy, even if they choose to do it their own way. But with Requiem folding the universe in half and making much of her decision as far as the choice of who would be merged with who, based on her attempt to not put the people together that Loki would want, because she believed that to do anything that he would want would be a form of manipulation. But rather, with her merging them together, she ended up doing exactly what Loki wanted, because Loki knew that she would go in his mind and do the exact opposite. And so what we come to find out for these different characters within Warp World, and primarily using the Ghost Panther for example, with him being the combination of both T'Challa and Johnny Blaze, this isn't so much the idea of the two of them working together and sharing a body, nor is it the two individuals fighting over the same body, but rather in Warp World, this combination has been this combination his entire life. And so is the same for all the other mergers who didn't realize there were two individual people until separated. And for that reason, each one of these combinations has their own backstory, their own merged history, which has led them on an augmented path to become the merger of both identities within one story. And so now for the Ghost Panther, who is Johnny Blaze and T'Challa both in one, he's born in Wakanda under the name T'Challa, Prince of Wakanda, but the change and conflict of his character take him on a very different path, because the T'Challa that we're used to is very subordinate, very respectful, and conscious of his heritage. But when you mix that with the young Johnny Blaze, his path also suffers from his arrogance, with a touch of rude and disrespectful behavior, which as a result gets him exiled. And after being exiled, he runs into Jericho Simpson, who recognizes his skill and his rage and gives him an opportunity to take all that energy to a platform that would help more than just beating up people on the street. And so Jericho Simpson, also known as Brother Crash, invited T'Challa to be part of his stunt show, also while giving him the stage name Johnny Blaze. And after taking that stage name, about 5 years had passed, and after a tragic accident cost him his life, T'Challa meets the half-sister of Bast, who goes by the name Zarathos. Alright, so we gotta pump the brakes for a minute, because we've already got another merger here that is much different than any of the other ones we've talked about so far, because of the likes of what we've seen with Brother Blaze, who's not one of your main heroes from the Infinity War event, but rather his combination was more so something that was deemed necessary in order to culminate the origin of the Ghost Panther, like Jericho Simpson for example, who is a combination of Jericho Drum, also known as Brother Voodoo, who had been merged with Craig Simpson, aka Crash Simpson, who in Ghost Rider's history originally started the Crash Simpson Daredevil Cycle show. And for that merger, much like the rest, it was pretty clear, with two separate individuals being placed into one without much of any change individually, but serving a new purpose collectively. And that's what takes me back to the Queen of Vengeance, who T'Challa meets after he dies, whose true name we're not given, but all we're told is she's the half-sister of Bast, the Hunter of Souls and the Queen of Vengeance, who has been exiled, and for that reason her true name is hidden. But rather than going by her true name, she goes by the name Zarathos. And I gotta admit, just hearing that, in my mind, it just gives me a whole lot to to unpack, especially with her name being hidden, because when you get into the history of Bast and her family, which is one of the topics we've been digging into recently, dealing with the intergalactic empire of Wakanda that takes place 2,000 years in the future and pulls back from much of its history, which calls back to modern day, which is 2,000 years from their past, and even from modern day reaching further back into the past, over thousands and potentially millions of years. But with this merged goddess that we've come across, who tells us that she's the half-sister of Bast, who has been exiled and her name hidden, on that end there's only one person who really comes to mind, and that would be the goddess Hathor Sekhmet. And even between the two names, both Hathor and Sekhmet, individually each represents a separate time for that particular goddess, with Hathor at one time being an Egyptian goddess whose name was later changed to Sekhmet when she was later ordered by Amun-Ra to punish the people of Egypt. And in the main universe, she eventually got a few followers from Wakanda, but in the grand scope it was only a handful, with most people worshipping Bast. But on the flip side of that, with her name being hidden, and I believe it's probably the hidden name is one of the two of the actual half-sister of Bast, but what I also find interesting is her going by the name Zarathos. And as you guys know, back when we talked about the origin of the first Ghost Rider as far as Marvel Legacy in Ghost Rider 1 million BC, in that talk I also went back and did like your full scope history of the Spirits of Vengeance, along with the explanation of who the true Zarathos is, and much of his story, how he collected the power from the original Spirits of Vengeance, which eventually led to Mephisto capturing him and sourcing from the original power that Zarathos had stolen. This is how Mephisto is able to create his own Spirits of Vengeance, by borrowing from the stolen power from Zarathos, who he has imprisoned. But either way, whether from Mephisto or this quote Zarathos from Warp World, in order to become a rider you have to accept their offer. And in the case of this T'Challa Johnny Blaze mashup, they declined the offer, but he's still resurrected because of Jericho Simpson doing a huge favor for the Panther Queen of Vengeance. But when T'Challa comes back, who more oftenly goes by the name of Johnny Blaze, his stage name, but when he comes back he awakens to the news of T'Chaka, his father, having been killed in Wakanda, which leads to one, Shuri taking the throne, but also Wakanda being without a Black Panther. And for whatever reason, just the falling of his father T'Chaka, like the way it went down, it reminds me a lot of See Wakanda and Die storyline. Like just the silhouettes of it remind me of it, even though how it went down here in Warp World is very different. But also along with this attack, the deep gardens of Wakanda were destroyed, and that's where they keep the heart-shaped herb. And without the heart-shaped herb, they don't have a Black Panther, and without a Black Panther, soon Wakanda won't even have a throne. And when T'Challa returns to Wakanda, initially expecting the heads of the killers to be on spikes, when he finds out that the killers are still at large, he immediately hops on his motorcycle to go after them, and he traces the killers down to the edge of the Gorgon Highlands, but he's only able to do so because of the help of the goddess who's going by the name of Zarathos. And she's pretty clever when she does this, because she gives him the offer of just being able to track them down, to sniff them out and track them down, asking for nothing in return. And it's pretty smart because it sets him up to this place to where he'll become face to face with this vengeance that he seeks, but because he doesn't have the strength of the Black Panther, there's nothing he can really do once he gets there. And when he arrives, of course he gets choked up and he calls out to Zarathos, accepting her offer, and of course having to say it out loud before obtaining the power of a rider. And in his case, which is a bit different from what we're used to from different Ghost Riders, and more so true to a Zarathos method of collecting souls, this rider, which is your Johnny Blaze and T'Challa combination, actually has to consume the souls at the end of the hunt, which initially doesn't sit well with him, and I can understand that. But when he does this, Warp World Zarathos isn't exactly pleased, like, well, okay, well, what did you expect me to have you do at the end of the hunt once you found these people? And I'm sure he thought that he was just going to kill them, not actually consume their souls. But with T'Challa stopping during mid-soul consumption and being intervened by Zarathos, this leaves him open for an attack by another merged character that we find in Warp World, which is Eric Killraven. And this has to be one of the furthest mashups that I could have expected. And if I'm correct, this is a mashup between Killmonger and Jonathan Raven, also known as Killraven, which is very left field as far as a choice, but it makes sense within this narrative. And so the first time I read this, I was thinking, okay, he's probably a mashup between Killmonger and Kraven the Hunter. But after taking in consideration his brother having been deceased, his brother's name, and some of the things that his brother had said, Killraven had just made much more sense. Because for his brother, M'Bashula, who Ghost Panther had pretty much consumed half of his soul, seeing that his name was a mixture between M'Baku and M'Shula, and M'Shula more so going back to your older Killraven comics, this just made a lot more sense because M'Bakshula, man, these mashup names is doing the most, but M'Bakshula before he died, he had made mention of killing many Martians in Warp World, which T'Challa really didn't know what was going on when he said that. But this lined up perfectly with the story of Killraven in the 691 universe, where his brother was also killed. But with his travels from Earth 691 to Earth 1124, and eventually making his way to the 616, which is now like your Marvel Prime Earth, it's there where this merger began to make a lot more sense. Because now you have this hybrid between Killmonger and Killraven, who not only seeks to destroy Wakanda, but with the addition of Killraven, this new merged character has a higher purpose behind doing so. Which makes sense, but man, that was a curveball. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.